Welcome to my video on the best Terastal for every Steel type Pokemon. So in this video, we are going to go through the pure Steel type and all of the dual typings and talk about what the best Terastal typing is for each of those typings. Now this video has taken me a very long time to produce. I've done this for every other typing as well. There's a playlist down below if you want to go and check this out. And honestly, I'm really excited to release this. But as it's taken so long, I really appreciate some support for this. So if you could like, subscribe, interact in any way with this video, I really would appreciate it. But without further ado, let's get started. Just some clarification about this video. First of all, this is not an exhaustive list of every single Terastal that would work well with that typing. It's just ones that, in my opinion, would work best for those specific typings. Also, this does not factor in abilities, so in the trailer we saw that Colossal turned to a water-type Terastal and had its steam engine activated. Now, in some cases, there are going to be abilities that are going to allow for this to be able to take place effectively, and it's going to allow for abilities to be used with regards to the Terastal combination. And when I've talked about their typings here, I have not considered abilities. I will talk about that separately when I do the competitive guide videos in the future. Also, some Pokemon may be suitable to use specific Terastal based on powerful moves that they have. So for example, if a Pokemon has a ground type move such as Earthquake, which is more powerful than Terra Blast, then they could definitely turn to that Terastal to get that stab to be able to allow that to do more damage. So in some cases where Pokemon have got powerful moves or a wide move pool, they may be suitable to use more variety of Terastal, but again, I have not factored that in with this one, just on the specific typings as a generalization. Here we have the pure Steel type. Now, the pure Steel type is typically a very bulky typing, and you've got Pokemon such as Melmetal and Copperaja that are able to put in a lot of work, and there are a few more pure Steel types as well. Now, with regards to the Steel type, you have got three weaknesses. You have got the ground type weakness, you have got the fighting weakness, and you've also got a fire weakness. Now, the best Terastal, in my opinion, in this case, would be to go for a water Terastal because it does hit the ground types and the fire type for super effective damage. So that would allow you to be able to really demolish any other Pokemon and only take neutral damage from the fighting type as well. Secondarily, I would go for a flying type. The flying type gives you a ground immunity, which is really good, and also allows you to hit the fighting type for super effective damage, but you would then take the neutral damage from the fire type. So, you know, it's playing to your strengths of your team in this case as to which one you think would be best there. Fairy definitely works as a secondary one. It allows you to be able to hit the fighting type for super effective damage. You take neutral damage from the fire and the ground. The issue is with the ground because you can't hit them very hard because they will take not very effective damage from that. So I would say in this case Fairy is the worst of the three, but still usable. I definitely think Water and Flying are going to be your top tier options to use as a Terastal for a pure Steel. Here we have the normal and Steel type Pokemon, which there are none currently representative in the Pokedex, and the main weakness that you would have here is going to be your fighting type. There is going to be a secondary weakness in ground type Pokemon, but you've got 4 times effective on your fighting type, and they are very common. So Psychic, Flying, and Fairy, they cover the weakness of the fighting type on all 3 of them. Flying also covers your weakness in terms of the ground type as well, because it will be immune to it. So those are the 3 different types that I would definitely recommend for your Steel Terastal, mostly in terms of fighting, but also Flying in terms of the ground aspect as well. So I think Flying in this case would be the best Terastal type. Next up, we've got Bug Steel. Now, the notable Pokemon here are Sizzle, you've got Scavalier, and also Fortress as well. I feel like Fortress is a commonly forgotten about Pokemon, if I'm honest. You've then got the Bug Steel type weakness, which the only weakness we have currently is the Fire type weakness. So in terms of Fire type weakness, you are going to want to change your typing suitably to get rid of that weakness. So you've got the Rock, Ground, or Water type. Now all 3 of those are super effective against Fire types, so it's just a case of choosing which one fits best with your team. I think all of them are equally good because they are all equally good at getting rid of your weakness. Next up is the Dark and Steel type. Now the notable Pokemon for this is going to be Bisharp, but at the same time you have got a huge weakness to fighting type, 4 times weakness to fighting types, meaning that your Terastal realistically you're going to want to run Fire, Flying, Fairy, or Psychic type. So running any of those freeze types will get rid of any of that fighting type weakness. You've also got a big weakness to ground as well, so I'd recommend running either a water or a grass type to cover that ground weakness, potentially as a Terastal. I'd say your biggest focus definitely wants to be your flying fairy or psychic, but to cover the fighting type, but if you want to go for the water or grass, obviously you can go for that as an alternative. Here we have the Dragon and Steel typing. Now the main Pokedex Pokemon is Duraludon, I think that's how you say it. You have also got Dialga that runs this type, but I haven't put many Uber Pokemon in here unless that's the only Pokemon that is available. So in terms of Dragon Steel typing, your main weaknesses are going to be your ground and your fighting type moves. So in terms of fighting type, I've put Fairy and Psychic here to cover that weaknesses. You've also got the Flying Terastal if you wanted to run that as well, which would make you immune to the ground type, so Flying type could work as well. And then you've got Water type, which would cover any of the ground type Pokemon that might come in. You could also run a grass type on that one as well. Next up we have got the Electric Steel type. Now this typing is a fantastic typing. It's got two weaknesses in ground and fighting, but they are very common typings in the game. So in regards to the ground typing, you want to run ground or water typing. That would allow for that Terastal to get rid of any weaknesses that you have and become super effective against the ground type Pokemon that's likely to come in. But you could also run the Psychic or the Flying Terastal for the fighting type Pokemon. Flying would also give you the immunity to ground typing as well, so that would work very nicely in your favour. The two notable Pokemon that we've got here are Magnezone and also Togedemaru. Those are the Electric Steel Pokemon. Now obviously if they got Levitate that'd be fantastic, but unfortunately they do not. Next up we have got the Steel Fairy type. Now there are two Pokemon that hold the Steel Fairy type. One is Klefki and the other one is Magiana. I think that's how you say it, it might not be. But the main weaknesses you have got here are definitely going to be your Fire type weakness and your Ground type weakness. So when it comes to your Fire type weakness, what you're going to want to do is run potentially a Ground, a Rock or a Water type. In this scenario, that would allow for you to be able to get rid of any of those Fire type Pokemon. With regards to the Ground type, however, you're more likely going to want to run the Water type. So I think Water type is definitely the top tier. It's Terastal for this Pokemon, but Ground and Rock are also good for alternatives, especially when you're not predicting there to be a Ground type Pokemon. However, it does depend on what team you're building and how that's working. Next up, we have got the Fighting and Steel type, and the two main Pokemon we have here are Lucario and Cobalion. So with regards to weaknesses here, you have not got the Fairy or Psychic weakness or the Flying weakness involved with the Fighting type, so you've basically nullified all of those weaknesses, but with the Steel type you have got the Ground and Fighting type weakness. So with regards to Terastal, for the Fighting weakness, you definitely could run a Flying type Terastal, you could run Psychic, or you could even run Fairy if you wanted to, depending on what you personally think. I've just put Fairy there as not Fairy there, Flying there as an option. And then with the Ground typing, you could run Water or Grass Terastal to get rid of that. But bear in mind, they could also bring in a Fire type against this, so using a Water Terastal works really well against the Ground and the Fire type, and then Ground works really well against the Fire type that could possibly come in. So I would say in this case, Water is probably the best Terastal typing, but Ground, Flying, Fairy or Psychic are good secondary Terastals that you could use. Next up we have Heatran with the Fire and Steel typing, the current only Fire and Steel typing. Now Fire and Steel, they have a weakness to ground, they have a weakness to water, and they have a weakness to fighting. Obviously the ground weakness is 4 times. So Terastals I recommend, you've got your water and your grass. Now they allow you, for both of them, to hit super effective on the ground type, and it allows you to be able to resist the water type in terms of the water, and it allows you to resist and also give a super effective attack on the water types with the grass type. Now with regards to the fighting type, you can run a Psychic, Fairy or Flying type Terastal if you wish, which is down to whichever one you have personal preference or what fits into your team personally, but I would definitely say that grass and water kind of a more top tier because they cover more of your weaknesses, and then Flying as a secondary option if that's what you need. Next up we have Flying Steel, which in my opinion is one of the best typings in the game. So notable Pokemon we have here are Corviknight, Skarmory and Celesteela. These are the only 3 that have the Flying Steel type typing. Now with regards to weaknesses, the only weaknesses that we have here are the Fire weakness and also the electric weakness. Now with this, we can cover both of those weaknesses with a ground type Terastal. So ground type Terastal is definitely the best option to run here, but if you are worried about the fire type, you could also run a water type Terastal, or you could run a rock type Terastal instead as well. But definitely ground is going to be your best option here, but you could run rock or water if you need an alternative. Here we have the Ghost and Steel type Pokemon, which is represented by Aegislash, the only Ghost and Steel type Pokemon we currently have. But with this typing, there are quite a few weaknesses associated as well. So with the Ghost typing, you have got the Dark and Ghost weakness, and that can be covered by a Dark or a Fairy Terastal. So the Dark Terastal would allow you to be able to take less damage on the Dark and the Ghost type attacks, and super effective on the Ghost. And the Fairy would allow you to take less damage on the Dark type attacks, and it would take neutral damage on the Ghost type attacks, whilst hitting super effectively on the Dark type Pokemon. So it could work very effectively there, and then anything that's super effective against the Steel typing would be neutral essentially. With regards to the Steel typing, you have got a few weaknesses involved here. You have got Fire types, you have got Ground types, and you have got potentially that's it. So with regards to fire types, I definitely recommend having a ground or a water Terastal, and that would allow for you to be able to hit those for super effective damage whilst taking less damage overall. And in the case of the ground Terastal, you can run the water type Terastal. So I think water in this case would probably be the best Terastal to run, because it would hit both the ground and the fire aspect, of which you are going to probably receive super effective damage, and it receives neutral damage on the other weaknesses that you have, such as Ghost and Dark, but you could definitely run a Fairy or Dark Terastal on side of that as well. Next up, we have got the Grass Steel type. Now, there's two Pokemon with this, there's Ferrothorn and there's Kartana, and they only have two weaknesses. One is a huge weakness to fire ×4, and you've also got a weakness to fighting as well. Those are the two weaknesses that you do have here. Now, in terms of fire, you can definitely Terastal into a water type, even a ground type or a rock type, but bear in mind with the rock type that you would be taking damage from the potential fighting type attack as well, so that's the least beneficial one there. But I think rock or ground definitely work very well as an option here. But with regards to the fighting type aspect, you definitely could have a Fairy or a flying type. Now, I would definitely recommend the flying type over the Fairy type, just because if the Fairy type, if a fire type Pokemon comes in, you're not going to hit for as effective damage as you would do with flying type, because it will be not very effective. You could also run the Psychic type Terastal here as well if you wanted to, but it's entirely up to you how you decide to run it. If you're worried really about the fire weakness and want to run, for example, like a ground Terastal to be able to hit the fire type super effectively, or the water type to hit the fire type very effectively, again, those work fantastically. Then you've got Flying, Psychic, which work really well. Fairy, you do need to be cautious of because of the fire types coming in, but it can also work as well, depending on how your team is built. Next up, we have got the Ground Steel typing. Two Pokemon that are relevant here are Excadrill and Steelix, but there could definitely be other Pokemon released after this recording. Now, with regards to weakness here, you have got a water type weakness in terms of your ground typing, and you have got a fire, ground, and fighting type weakness in terms of your steel typing, which does make a few issues start to appear. Now, with regards to Terastalling here, it is kind of difficult to be able to get a really, really good Terastal. The best Terastal I could come up with was the Water Terastal, because one, it takes not very effective damage from your water typing, and it hits super effectively on your fire and also your ground typing, whilst taking neutral damage from the fighting type. So water, I would say, is the best Terastal in this case, but you could also run Psychic or Flying. Flying allows you to hit super effectively on the fighting typing, it allows you to hit neutral on fire and water, and also gives you an immunity to the ground typing as well, so that can work more as a defensive one, which I think definitely is possible. And then you've put the Psychic typing here, it's super effective against the fighting type, but neutral damage from all of the rest. So these three Terastals I think are the top three. I'd say water is the best, followed by flying, and then followed by Psychic in this scenario. Next up, we have got the Ice and Steel typing. The typing Pokemon here is Alolan Sandslash. Now, this typing does have two 4x weaknesses in fighting as well as fire, so you do need to be very, very cautious of that. In terms of dealing with the fire type and not having the issues with the fighting type aspect, you definitely should go for a ground or a water Terastal. Now, these would nullify any of the any of the fire type issues and would allow for you to hit super effectively on that fire type, and also would take away the fighting type issue there as well. Now I've also put psychic and flying in here. Flying allows for you to get rid of your weakness to ground entirely and give you an immunity, whilst hitting super effectively on the fighting type and also hitting neutrally on a fire type. And psychic does similar, just without giving that immunity to the ground, and allows you to hit super effective on fighting type, neutral on the fire type, and also neutral on the ground typing as well. But I would say, realistically, all three of those are really good options to use when it comes to Terastal for an ice or steel. Ice and steel. Next up, we have got the poison steel type, which there are none currently. I believe there is a ground steel type rumoured to be coming into the game at the time of recording, but I don't know if that actually has happened because the game hasn't released when I've been recording this. So we have got the steel poison type. The big standout weakness here is going to be your ground type, and your other weakness is going to be your fire typing. So realistically, the best Terastal for this is going to be the water typing, because it hits both your weakness for super effective damage and also takes neutral damage from the fire type, from the ground type, and not very effective damage from the fire type. You can also run grass to hit the ground typing, but do be cautious. Obviously a fire type could definitely come in, so that is much more of a risky play to go for, but it's definitely an option for you to go for if you are confident and you have another Pokemon on the team, such as a flash fire Pokemon that could use that bait. You've then got the ground type Terastal as well, which is super effective against the fire type, and it hits neutrally on the ground type as well. So realistically, water is your best Terastal, but if you want to use grass or ground, you can use them, but just be a little bit cautious of the impact, especially with the grass. Here we have the psychic and steel typing, repped by Metagross, Jirachi, and Bronzong here as well, and I think there are possibly one or two other psychic and steel typings. Now looking at your weaknesses, you have got your dark and ghost weakness when it comes to the psychic type, and you've got a fire and ground weakness when it comes to the steel typing. So with regards to the steel typing, running a water type Terastal definitely works really well. It allows you to hit super effectively on your ground type and your water type, your fire typing, whilst hitting neutrally from the other two weaknesses that you have in ghost and also in the dark typing. The dark typing does work quite effectively in running here as well. It takes neutral damage from the ground type and the fire type, and can take not very effective damage from the dark type and not very effective damage from the ghost type, whilst hitting the ghost type for super effective damage. You've then got the fairy type. Now the fairy type is probably the more risky one to play here, because if a fire type does come in, it does put you into a problematic situation where you can't cause as much damage, but it does allow for you to hit the dark types for super effective damage and take neutral damage from any of the other typings that would be super effective in this case. So personally, I would say that the water type is the best Terastal, followed by dark, but fairy is definitely an option, but again, in a more situational approach. Next up, we have got the rock and steel type. Now this is a very good typing, and the mons that we have here typically are very bulky in Bastiodon, Aggron, and Stakataka, but at the same time, this has got two massive weaknesses, one being the fighting type and one being the ground type, which 4 times weakness obviously is huge, and you have also got a weakness to the water typing as well, which is kind of annoying. But there are 3 different typings that I've put for coverage on here. So flying type, I personally think will be your best Terastal here, because 1, it will hit the fighting types for super effective damage, 2, it gives you an immunity to the ground typing, which is obviously something that you're very weak to, and hits neutrally on the water typing as well. So flying type, I think, should work the best. You have also got grass typing, which hits super effectively against the water typing. It's resisted to the ground type, so you'll take less damage from the ground typing, and also you'll take neutral damage from the fighting type there as well. So grass works more as a defensively front, but grass and flying definitely are your 2 best options here. You have then got fairy type. Now fairy type hits the fighting type for super effective damage, and then takes neutral from the ground and the water typing as well. So it's a good secondary option that allows you to kind of hit for some coverage there as well. You could even run things like water type if you wanted to run defensively, but I would definitely say that flying and grass are your top tier Terastals here, followed by fairy as a secondary. Next up, we have got the water steel type. The only Pokemon with this typing currently is Empoleon, but in the future, who knows, we might have some more Pokemon with this typing. Now with regards to the water steel typing, you have got 3 weaknesses. You've got the ground weakness, you have got the fighting weakness, and you have also got the electric type weakness. So couple of problems there that you can hopefully deal with. Now I've suggested a psychic type Terastal that allows you to hit really hard on the fighting type Pokemon, whilst not having the concerns with the flying type, such as that you would get from the super effective electric typing. So having the psychic type means you hit the fighter type for super effective damage and take neutral from both the ground and the electric typing. You've got the ground typing here, which allows you to hit the electric typing for super effective damage and take neutral damage from both of the fighting and also the ground typing as well. And then you've got grass, which grass could actually potentially be the best of the three here. So grass takes neutral damage from the fighting, but it is super effective against the ground type and also takes not very effective damage from the electric typing here. So it works as an offensive slash defensive version for a Terastal, and realistically will probably be your best option to run with a steel or water type. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate every single view that any of these videos get, and you know I've put so much time into this that if you made it this way, then all I can do is thank you with my heart, because you know you're what helps the channel. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. As I said, if you could interact, I'd really appreciate it. Comment down below if there are any ones that you disagree with or any ones that you would add a different Terastal typing to, and give your reasoning for it as well. And I'd really love to see that. I think that would be a really cool way to interact with me, and I will definitely take a look at them and I'll try and reply as much as I can. But yeah, thank you so much for watching.